Well, Mr. Harper, thanks for agreeing to the interview here. Just when everything regarding the decades of child abuse was quietening down and the care inquiry was all going quiet, William Bailhache decides to revive it all in a speech yesterday in our Parliament. Did you listen to his speech? And if so, what did you make of it?
Yes, I did. I did listen to it, and my initial impression was this. I mean, I've always tried not to comment on the politics of Jersey, although I was unavoidably dragged into them so often when I was actually working there. But since then, but it seemed to me that for someone who was trying to deny the existence of the Jersey Way, which we all know exists very, very heavily, running mostly in the background, for someone who was trying to deny its existence, he made a very, very good job of actually proving that it's alive, well, and kicking. He used his position, or his dual position, should I say, to make a blatantly political speech using his office. And then he used that same office to shut down and point blankly refuse to give anybody the opportunity to question him. And it seemed to me that the irony there was that in trying to defend his position on the Jersey Way and the non-existence of it, he actually made a very good case for showing that it's alive and kicking.
Yeah, obviously part of his attack on the care inquiry was saying that they came with a preconceived idea and a prejudice against what a good constitution or something looks like. Did you hear that bit?
Yes, I did, and the care inquiry. I don't think the care inquiry came to the island with a preconceived notion of what a good constitution looked like. I think they came very well aware from all around the world of what a bad constitution looks like, and I think they came to the island expecting that they were going to be coming and dealing with a respectable government, and then found to their horror that they weren't. When he's attacking the care inquiry, my other point is that he's not really attacking the care inquiry. He's really having another horrible dig at the credibility and of the survivors and the victims, who were the ones who suffered in all of this. The care inquiry related faithfully the evidence that they heard over so long a period, evidence which people showed great courage in coming forward to give them, and they came to their carefully considered the verdict and conclusions on the evidence that they heard. And for him to dismiss them as being mistaken and erroneous is just a further attack by the Jersey establishment on the courage of the victims, the integrity of the victims and the survivors, and those who were brave enough to come forward and give evidence.
Yeah, rightly so. I think he did sort of, if you like, pay tribute to the survivors, saying that they were believed in it. So I think he will argue that part of his speech did sort of stick up for the survivors.
Yeah, it was a mealy-mouthed platitude, wasn't it? And when all that has gone before is taken into consideration, he's been boxed into a corner there. And yes, I mean, it's very easy to use words. Actions speak louder than words, though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The actions of the Jersey establishment, I was going to say the legal and the political establishment, but they're both one and the same in Jersey, aren't they? So the actions of the Jersey establishment in no way supported, and to this day, the establishment, they're still trying to undermine the findings of the Committee of Inquiry.
Yeah, good point. So the part I'm quite really interested in, because I've interviewed the children's minister about most of this, but the part I'm interested in is where William Bailhache completely, utterly, and unequivocally vindicated you and your investigation, under your control. So, I mean, he couldn't have been more unequivocal of almost praising you. So what did you make of that?
Well, excuse me for laughing, but I mean, I have to say I found it quite comical in some ways, because you could almost hear him choking on the words. He was having to clear his throat several times during what he said. And yeah, I mean, it was a shock to me to hear him say that I did an extremely fine job in investigating child abuse, and that I was absolutely right to do what I did. But it was a clear vindication, but it was said through a blocked throat and gritted teeth, I suspect.
Yeah, because as you say, actions speak louder than words, and I suppose whilst your investigation was Operation Rectangle was ongoing under your leadership, he wasn't the most helpful of people, was he? Was he as Attorney General?
No, it wasn't, and his office wasn't. And but we've been through all that before, and it's all there on the record. But even after I retired, I still remember the stringent efforts that he made to seize documentation that I was later to use as evidence for the committee of inquiry, even down to the fact that he demanded the retirement cards that I received from colleagues, and I'm quite sure that was only to search for evidence and not to conduct any witch hunt against those who had been supportive of the investigation. So I remember all of that, and the efforts that he made, and the quite stark differences in what the standard of evidence that I felt was required to charge Jersey officials, and the standard of evidence that he thought was required. But not only me. I mean, there were lawyers there as well who looked at the evidence and said, "Whoa, there should be charges brought here." So, I remember all this. It's very hard to take his words of praise seriously, especially when you actually look and you can actually hear him clearing his throat as he's uttering the words, as if those words are choking him.
Well, you'll take the vindication, but the actions beforehand, yeah. So, of course, this isn't the only vindication you've had. You were previously vindicated primarily, basically, by the Association of Chief Police Officers. The 4 ACPO reports completely and utterly vindicated you, and indeed the Care inquiry itself completely and utterly vindicated you. Now, none of this, including the bailiff's speech yesterday where you were vindicated, has been reported by the local old media, formerly known as the mainstream media. Does it surprise you that the mainstream media, that they've reported extensively on a speech, but haven't broadcast or published, to the best of my knowledge, a single word of you being vindicated and your inquiry being vindicated?
No, it doesn't surprise me because, again, I go back, but just before I do, I mean, about what William Bailhache said yesterday, I have no doubt that when he said yesterday that his view on the fact that I had done a good job and I was absolutely right to do what I did, I have no doubt that he was speaking the truth there. But he was only speaking the truth because he was being, in a way, shamed into it by what the Committee of Inquiry. He no longer had any refuge to turn to try and put up false assertions about what we were doing or why we were doing it. And it was their situation where all of the stuff put forward by the establishment previously had been shown to be incorrect, and that the survivors and victims were all telling the truth, that we were working on behalf of the victims and survivors. So we really had nowhere else to go yesterday. And as for the media, no, I remember back to the days when, for instance, and the one that always stands starkly out is the Jersey Evening Post reporter who reported in the early days of our search of Hotel Agaran that a builder had told them we would find shackles, and when she challenged me about the shackles, I refused to comment. And on in the Jersey Evening Post that night, she actually explicitly stated that I had refused to confirm that shackles were found. And less than a month later, she was running a headline story blaming me for raising the issue of shackles and saying that I had spread the word about shackles. And that's only one example. So, that sort of barefaced lie being told by on that occasion by the Jersey Evening Post. So when the fact that they're now too ashamed and too cowardly to broadcast the fact that the outgoing bailiff has explicitly and without any qualifications had to admit that I was absolutely right to do what I did, and that the team that I was working with were doing a fine job in investigating the abuse, and myself, then no, it doesn't surprise me that they haven't got the courage to put that in their record of the speech yesterday. The probable fact is that although it's not the same staff, editorial staff that were there at the time, they're probably too embarrassed to admit that they got it very, very wrong.
Well, I think this is the huge problem, because I remember once it came about, and I was staggered. An interview you and I did previously, when I asked if any of the media had contacted you, because they'd all run stories on how much you spent on a prawn cocktail in a London restaurant and the rest of it. And I was staggered to learn that none of them had ever contacted you for your side of events. So I suppose I've got to ask again, has any of the media contacted you regarding your vindication from the bailiff yesterday?
No, absolutely not. None of them have, and I don't expect that they will.
Yeah, because they are in a pretty precarious position, aren't they? They can't turn around and say, well, Lenny Harper did a great job and a fantastic job, considering they've spent the best part of a decade trying to discredit you and your team. So I suppose they're in a pretty tough spot, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, they're probably totally embarrassed at the fact that for so long they have been peddling one myth, and now when the truth has been, the rug has been pulled from under their feet by the very person that they were supporting all along, and now that he has blown that myth apart, they're too embarrassed and ashamed to admit that in fact they got it wrong all this time.